Welcome everyone to our last webinar series of the 2025 winter webinar series. Welcome to spring. It's glorious out there. I'm Johanna Miller. I lead the Energy and Climate Program at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. As many of you know, we help with partners to coordinate VCAN, the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, the network of town energy committees, and the many partners who we're collaborating with to support them. Those partners include Vital Communities, Efficiency Vermont, the Vermont Council on Rural Development, the Energy Action Network, and our fantastic network of regional planning commissions. So grateful to have your time today and really looking forward to sort of just a different type of webinar. We wanted to close this series with sort of stepping back for a moment to hear from Liz Amler, who's the climate planning administrator at the Climate Action Office, about the really important work that the Climate Action Office and the Vermont Climate Council have been undertaking, to hear from Vermonters as the work advances to update the state's required climate action plan. So Liz is going to give us a sort of high-level distillation of the feedback that they've been hearing from hundreds of Vermonters over the last month and beyond. And then we're really looking forward to some small group conversations with you all, gonna push us into some breakout groups tailored around core topics, including transportation, weatherization, and workforce likely, agriculture and resilience strategies. And we really just want to have more of a deep dive conversation with you all about, what your priorities are, what your concerns are in this moment, and sort of for those of us who work at the local level and want to continue to support and nurture the work at the local level in these pretty challenging times. We really just want to have a collective conversation and distill as much from you all about how we can collaborate, how the VCAN partners can support you, how this work fits into the state's broader energy and climate action efforts. So very deeply grateful for the work that you all are doing in your communities, for the work of our VCAN partners. And I want to give a special shout out to Evelyn Seidner for helping to support these webinars over the course of the winter. And now it's a gorgeous spring, and for your work today to help pull this together. And really appreciate Laura Bailey too, who's going to help facilitate the small group breakout. So this is a massive team effort. So we're really looking forward to the context that Liz is going to share about what Vermonters are saying in terms of their priorities, hopes, concerns that they want to see articulated in updated climate action plan. And then we're going to we wanted to sort of set that context to maybe potentially help inform the work that we're all doing at the local level, that you're all leading at the local level through the small group breakouts. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Liz to have you ground us. What are we hearing from Vermonters, Liz, and what's happening with the Climate Action Plan update? Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. And okay, let's share the slides. Great, thank you. I'm Liz. I'm from the Climate Action Office, and my role is supporting the Climate Council through this Climate Action Plan update that's happening. So I'm excited to share with you a bit about the Climate Action update process, where we are in that, and then particularly focusing on what have Vermonters been saying around the state as the council has been going around presenting the draft of the update of the Climate Action Plan. And then we'll kind of close out just in terms of like what's the next steps with this Climate Council and the Climate Action Plan, and happy to take any questions as well. So we can move to the next slide. Thanks. So this is just a bit of a grounding of how we got to where we are in terms of the Climate Council and the update of the Climate Action Plan, starting in 2020 with the passage of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which really stems from the Paris Climate Agreement and emission reduction targets, as well as ideas and policy discussions that have been kind of percolating in Vermont for a long time, to set real hard targets for emission reduction goals and in the coming years. And so with that law, there was establishment of standing up a climate council, which is an independent body comprised of members of the administration. So for instance, there's the Secretary of Transportation, Commerce and Community Development, the Commissioner of Public Service Department is on the Climate Council, as well as Vermonters who are appointed by Vermont House and Senate. So, for example, we have a youth representative seat on the council. We have a representative who represents small businesses. Joanna serves on the council. That council is charged with creating a climate action plan to meet those emission reduction goals that are set by law. And the initial climate action plan was established in 2021. So this isn't the council's first rodeo in terms of like putting out a climate action plan, but we are in this first update that occurs every 4 years. And so with this update process, it's due July, which is right around the corner. So we could go to the next slide. And I think you need to like press the space bar a few times to get this one going, but there we go. Thank you. So in terms of where we are in the update process itself, it kicked off in this past spring and summer. The Climate Action Office went around the state, just sharing with Vermonters that there's going to be an update to the plan, the different opportunities to get involved in that process, whether it's drafting the updates to the plan or providing input later on. In the fall, there were subcommittees formed to support the Climate Council's work in this update. So I think of it in terms of kind of like specific working groups for topics. So there was cross-sector mitigation that works on buildings and thermal. There was rural resilience subcommittees, and they had task groups that worked on public health or built infrastructure. And they were tasked with really like closely examining these initial recommendations and going a first round of updating it. Once they had that initial work, they passed it to the council this winter, who did the work of who are the ultimate deciders of what goes into this plan, and we're really looking to fine tune that. They got to a place where they were ready to put it out to the public for feedback. And that's like the process of where we are now. We just finished up this past April. We were going around the state and sharing that the Climate Council members were sharing the draft update to the Climate Action Plan with support from the Climate Action Office, our engagement team, the Consensus Building Institute, and Regional Planning Commission folks who some are on the call and helped us out in their particular regions in getting Vermonters to the table. And so that's where we are now, and I'm going to share a bit about like what came out of those sessions. So we could go to the next slide, though I think a picture is going to pop up. Yeah, we talked about that. Yep, awesome. So this is a bird's eye view perspective of just like where the council and team went around the state to get this input. We had like 9 in-person sessions, 2 virtual. It's not on this list here, but we actually just last night had a virtual youth event with youth from around the state. But this definitely isn't like what I'm sharing isn't like a scientific study of all Vermonters and their view of this update to the plan, but we did try our best to reach Vermonters where they're at in their communities to get their feedback and input from different corners around the state. And there is a packet I'm going to share that could go into more detail of that, but I'm about to share the overview of those sessions. So we could go to the next slide. And the input was really focused on draft recommendations that kind of fall into these 4 buckets. So there's cross-sector mitigation that I mentioned, that's transportation recommendations, electricity around buildings and thermal. We had rural resilience, our built environment, our infrastructure, community and planning. Public health was a new focus this time around in the update of the plan. We also have cross-cutting, which doesn't necessarily fit into like one bucket, but cuts across all of them, whether it's through workforce development or education, compact settlement, making our communities more walkable. There was also a new financing cross-cutting recommendation this time around as well. And then agricultural and ecosystems, how are we supporting and adapting our natural and working lands? And we could go to the next slide. So at all these sessions, we presented the draft priority recommendations and folks had time to like read it and take it in. And then our facilitators would ask two questions. The first being like, out of all these recommendations that you're reading, like what's compelling, what speaks to you, like what are you excited to see that's in here? And so the summary, like high level summary of all these input sessions is that there's a lot of enthusiasm for actions that cut emissions. So whether that's through weatherization programs or electrification, how we heat and cool our buildings and supporting transportation. There's also excitement around cap and invest, discussions about like cost of it and the complexity of it as well. They were excited about the actions that support low and middle income Vermonters. Definitely a lot of discussion around like workforce actions and education recommendations, and supporting our community resilience and adaptations. We go to the next slide. The second question that we asked folks was, what's missing in here? Like what can be improved? There was definitely concerns about the cost of these actions, how Vermont would fund them. There was also just like with the recent flooding events, there was like Vermonters saying that we wish there was more focus on the hazards that Vermont is facing today. There was interest in geothermal networks, and they didn't see that in the priority actions. Also about like conservation of our forests and our lands, how do we protect outdoor workers, and also just wanting more focus on like resilience hubs and resiliency in general. And there was comments about building codes as well. Go to the next slide. Also across all these meetings, we definitely heard from Vermonters on wanting to have more focus and clarity across these recommendations for the update to the plan. So I should also have mentioned before that these priority recommendations, there's about 56, but in totality of like what the number of actions, I think it's around 200 that the council is currently looking at putting forward right now, but 56 like rose to the top to put out at these public events. So, but even that 56 is like a lot to take in. And so there was hope of being like, could there be a top 10, or maybe there's a short term and a long term, but just like some kind of like simplification and ways to prioritize this for Vermonters. There was also a request for like plain language, that there was just a lot of like wonkiness to the language that was in these recommendations. If you're just like, if you're not in this work day in, day out, you're not necessarily going to know what all of this means. And to be like more specific when possible around certain programs and certain actions in the plan. We can go to the next slide. So this was a fun exercise that we did towards the end to just get a sense of where Vermonters' priorities are when it comes to funding and the different areas of the climate action plan. So I had laid them out before, like cross-sector mitigation, cross-cutting, rural resilience, and agriculture. And so we had kind of like a quadrant on a big piece of paper with these 4 issues, and each participant was able, they had like 10 poker chips, and we asked them like, if you only had 10 poker chips, like where would you distribute your funds for these issues? Like what are you prioritizing? And so what's laid out here is a summary of that exercise at all of the in-person events. We didn't do this exercise at the virtual, but you'll see here like what rose to the top was cross-sector, followed by cross-cutting, and ag and eco, and then rural resilience. But it was an interesting exercise just to see, if you had those 10 poker chips, where would they land for you? We go to the next slide. So in terms of just like where we're at in this process and where we're going, we just wrapped up those input sessions across the state. The council is now turning around and like doing the work of, we got this input from the public. Perhaps counselors also have some concerns with some lingering recommendations or some ideas of what's missing. Let's turn around and finalize these priority recommendations. June, and they're also going to be at the same time, there's going to be like a chapter narrative that goes with this plan, so that there's more of a story to tell on Vermont's climate action plan. So they're working on those narratives as well this month and next. And then July is when it's submitted, with the hope of summer and fall being able to share this plan with Vermonters at events across the state. And I'll also say that we do have this link that I could plug into the chat, which I like provided a high level summary of these input sessions. But if you're really interested in like what was the specific feedback on cross sector mitigation or electricity or something really specific, we have that in this packet that I'll share. Or if you wanted to see like a certain region, we have all that information. It was just a lot to go through in the time that we had today, but I'm going to share that so that you have it to dig into the details further. And I'll also share the draft priority recommendations that Vermonters reviewed during these input sessions in case you haven't gotten the chance to take a look. And let's see, you could go to the next slide. So I think that's it. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to take some questions and thanks for hearing about like our climate action plan and the update and where it's going so far.
Thank you, Liz, for all of that background information.